Hello and welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. Thank you for hanging out with us for the next hour or so. We've got a great conversation lined up for you. I know there was close to 500 people that registered for this one, so really excited to see you all start to trickle in. And what we're talking about today is tips to survive and thrive, all in the terms of data and digital transformation. And I have two incredible guests to help me talk through this today. I am joined by Alyssa Merwin, the VP of Sales at LinkedIn Sales Solutions, and Mary Shea, the Principal Analyst over at Forrester. Mary, Alyssa, welcome.
Thanks, Scott. Great to be here.
Excited to have you both. And so this discussion, just for those who are joining us, is going to be sort of a Q&A roundtable style discussion. So we've got a great chat sort of lined up for you. We will be taking questions. So we love it when this is engaging. We do these for the community, to get back to the community. So we want to make sure we're addressing things that are relevant to you and your business. So there is a Q&A feature at the bottom. I'll be kind of managing that. We're going to leave most of the Q&A to the end, but please ask questions throughout as we go and as it's fresh in your mind. And then a few housekeeping items. Number one, these are always recorded. So if your dog starts biting at your leg, or your kids are yelling, or you got to go teach a math test, or all the crazy new things that we have to do now, feel free to go and do that. We'll send this recording out in about 24 hours when we wrap up. And then number two, it's always more fun when we know who we're hanging out with. So there also is a chat feature at the bottom. So if you don't mind jumping on the chat feature and letting us know your name, the company you're with, and maybe your title, it helps us sort of frame the conversation and know who we're hanging out with. Makes it more fun for all of us. But that is all the housekeeping out of the way. Before we dive into it, Mary, do you mind just giving a little bit more about your background? And I usually call it the superhero origin story of Mary Shea.
Yeah, sure. Happy to share with you, Scott, and with the broader audience today. So great to be here. Thanks, everyone. So I'm a principal analyst at Forrester, and I've actually been at Forrester for about 10 years in two separate stints. So I started way back when Forrester was a really small company. I think it was employee 97 or something. And I was actually an inside sales rep. And I had the opportunity to grow my career professionally with Forrester as the business was on a very big trajectory. And we were focused on helping businesses really understand what the impact of the internet was going to be on how organizations would connect with their customers, trading partners, and so on. So it was a really interesting and transformational time. I won't go into all the details after that, but I did leave the organization. I became a chief commercial officer at a number of different global organizations, and then rejoined about 5 years ago. But instead of being on the product side, or on the sales side, I'm on the product side now. So it's kind of like a dream come true, really. I had always hoped to be on the analyst side of the business when I was in sales. And so I really bring, sort of having done a variety of different roles, from inside sales to chief revenue officer, everything in between, and a love of research to the process.
Yeah, very cool. Thanks for sharing that. And it's interesting, you started your career thinking of the impact the internet was going to have, which I think it changed a couple things, and it almost seems like it's come full circle now, because now we're talking about the next evolution of digital transformation. So you've really seen the whole gambit at the beginning when we started to digital transform, into now where it's like full blown, and people are now working all across in a distributed team. So that's cool. Excited to hear your perspective. And Alyssa Merwin, how did you become the VP of Sales at LinkedIn? There's got to be an incredible story there.
So thanks, Scott. I'll certainly share the cliff notes here. Not dissimilar from Mary, I started also in the inside sales team. I started right out of school as a BDR at a company called the Corporate Executive Board, which is now owned by Gartner, and spent the first part of my career there, worked my way up from BDR to an account executive and then sales manager, and then made the jump to LinkedIn about, gosh, about 10 years ago. So right at the beginning of LinkedIn's sort of real inflection point, and joined as an early sales manager in the New York office and helped to grow that business across the last few years, and then made the move over to our sales solutions business about 3 years ago. So it's been quite a journey, and really, really cool to see it from a couple of different industries.
Mhm. Very cool. I imagine these last 10 years at LinkedIn must have been such an incredible journey to see the growth. How long has LinkedIn been around now?
We just had our, I want to say 15th. I think it was at least 15th anniversary. So
Wow.
it's been a while. Yeah, the early days, I think it was a little bit more under the radar. Of course, there are those
Yeah.
diehard early members, but it was sort of on everybody else's radar. I think a
Yeah.
handful of years after it really started to take off.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, let's dive into it. And this is there's a lot of places we can go with this topic, but usually when we discuss things, I like to start with kind of presenting the challenges first. And Mary, I'll start with you on this question. What are the biggest gaps that sort of have come to light in the current environment, particularly for B2B sales organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll answer that question by starting a little bit before the current environment, because I think there's a couple of things that are coming together to make the challenges even more intense. So prior to COVID, or to at least our awareness of it, I think there's some real gaps between how business buyers wanted to and expected to engage with sales folks, and the sales experience that they wanted. So you've all heard about the digitization of the B2B buyer, the consumerization of that buyer. We now have a millennial population that's a third of the workforce, soon to be half of the global workforce in 4.5 years. And so buyers today really desire efficiency. They are self-directed. They want to self-educate. There's all kinds of social places to go and learn more about a new partner, solution, and so on. And so the role of the salesperson has really been changing, whereby it's not so much, sort of knocking open those doors and overcoming objections and driving a linear deal forward, but it's more of becoming that helpful advisor, that coach. I talked to one of our reps yesterday who was in a really interesting situation where one of our clients had purchased a wide range of advisory units, and they didn't want to use them post-COVID. And so what he was doing was going to tin cup to other areas of the organization to help his contact figure out how not to get stuck with the economic burden of that piece of the business. So, becoming that type of guide who's going to help the sales process is what's required for the new seller. And so I think there's been a pretty big gap between selling organizations' ability to deliver that experience and what buyers have been expecting. And that's one thing that I've really seen. And I'd love Alyssa to weigh in too, because she's, on the front lines of this, and see if, are you seeing the same thing? Do you have a different perspective?
Yeah, there's no question, and we've certainly seen the research and we experience it in practice that buyers are so much further down the buying decision by the time we walk in the door. I think there's less of us walking in trying to convince someone that they have a need, and more we're coming in and helping them make a decision, between a bunch of different variables and different options. And I think a couple other things that we've personally experienced, and I imagine this is probably the case for many organizations right now, is we might have been able to sell a bit more on a vision before COVID, but we're seeing budgets being cut across the board. I think it's like 50% of buyers are experiencing budget cuts, and so the vision selling and the dream and the promise is no longer enough. We're having to build rock solid business cases with hard ROI, with um, real financial returns, and really our litmus test right now is, would this pass muster with the CFO? And if not, it's not going to be enough to probably get through a buying process. So I think that's one of the other big things that we're seeing that's being exacerbated. It was probably coming for a long time, but with the current state of the macro environment, it's more important now than ever.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and I remember, Alyssa, you talking about that, our last conversation. This idea of uh, always knowing that the CFO is now going to be one of the personas you're selling into, even if traditionally they haven't. And funnily enough, I did a webinar on Tuesday with our friends over at Chorus, and they actually had some data behind this. And they said they're seeing an 81% increase in CFOs joining sales meetings, which
Wow.
is that's a pretty incredible increase to see. And it's kind of a double-edged sword. If you're doing the right things, that's awesome because no one can move a deal faster than a CFO. But if you're doing the wrong things, and like you said, you kind of have you're selling on a vision, that's going to get blown up very, very quickly. Um, Mary, I want to touch on something you said, and it's this. I guess my question is, why do you think sales teams are we're almost hooked on linear thinking? We want to map out this nice buyer's journey that has all these stages, and it's almost not possible anymore. Is this just we're stuck in traditional ways of thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably some of it is just sort of the competitive DNA of the salesperson where you always want to be moving something forward to some sort of a conclusion. And that gets reinforced by sales management and pipeline management systems and CRMs where, you're really on the hook to continue to move a prospect or customer through those milestones so that you can justify the job that you're doing before the deal comes. Because sometimes particularly in software and other types of highly complex sales, the deal could take quite some time. So I think it's part of kind of how we've been raised as salespeople. But you're absolutely right, Scott, that the buying journey is anything but linear at this point, and the buyer really exhibits a lot of control. So they're jumping into downloads of digital content. They're going to an event. They're attending something like this. Maybe they want to do a remote meeting. And as Alyssa said earlier, they're coming to the process much later and usually with a pretty predetermined point of view on the category and the
Mhm.
potential vendors or partners that they're looking to partner with. So it is definitely time for sales folks to really move their mindset and start to think about how to engage in a way that is fluid with what the buyer's looking for.
Mhm. Yeah, and I imagine so. We're shifting to this seemingly a new skill set required from salespeople, right? If we're asking them to do different activities than before, that requires different skills.
Yep.
Um, Alyssa, at LinkedIn, have you sort of adapted your what you look for in new hires at all?
Well, I don't know that we've been that fast in the last few months to be able to totally shift the interview criteria and the skills, but I can tell you based on some research that we did really recently that in this environment there are skills that are more critical now than ever, and we're seeing that with our own sales team, and then we're seeing that more broadly. But one of those, and I think this is a really interesting one because it's the one where there's the biggest disconnect between what buyers want and what sales managers are doing, and that is around active listening. And it makes so much sense when you think about it. We're now in a world where everyone is virtual, and the rapport building, the relationship building, the schmoozing, all of that it's harder to do, and we're probably doing less of it in some way. But maybe we're going deeper and having more meaningful connections in some ways, but we're doing less of the dinners and the all of those other things that some sales teams would do. What buyers are really looking for is to make sure when I'm engaging on a video conference or in a sales conversation that the seller is really hearing and understanding me. And so here's the disconnect. It was the number one skill requested and really demanded by buyers. And from a sales manager perspective, it showed up as number 7 on the list of core competencies and skills that they were training on. And sales managers had things like relationship building, and confidence in other things that they had above. As I thought that was a really interesting dynamic that's playing out, and it makes a ton of sense. We have limited, I think we have a high threshold for what's going to be, valuable enough for me to have this conversation, and limited attention for anything that doesn't meet that bar. So that is something that we're seeing, and I think, to get to your question, will certainly be something we continue to probe for, and really look at as we refine our hiring criteria going into the future. I mean, it's always been an important skill, but I've never seen it so starkly contrasted. And Mary, I don't know if you guys are seeing
Yeah.
anything in your world as well.
Well, first of all, I love the study, and I read it, and I thought that was really outstanding and really interesting that active listening skills came out higher than critical problem solving, communication, relationship building, all things that I certainly would have gone after in my hires. So I thought that was very informative. I think the other thing that really struck me that you talked about, sort of these, we're not doing these big pitches in boardrooms, we're not schmoozing over expensive meals, and we're not walking the halls of our corporate clients anymore, right? And those were kind of pretty primary things that your most tenured and seasoned enterprise sales folks would be doing. So now the challenge is, how do you sort of translate that into a remote, virtual, digital world? And so we're seeing things like sellers who are really effective on synchronous and asynchronous video, being able to really differentiate themselves and their companies, and to have a lasting human and empathetic connection. You've got to roam the digital halls on social, right? You can't do that physically, so now you need to use multiple different social channels, engage authentically, have the right presence, which is a little bit different from channel to channel. And so it's a very different world. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is that even as organizations cut spending, they're investing in different types of tools and solutions to make sure their sellers are properly supported, and also looking at trying to reskill and upskill sellers for some of these new activities and skills that they may not have, or we as managers may not have hired for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think
So,
there's also a whole, I mean, just to put a pin in it, there's a whole category of sellers that only were doing field sales or face to face. And there are companies that are having to provide training for how do you conduct a video conference effectively, or a phone call. It is a whole different skill set. And I think we can't underestimate or assume that just because someone was great in person that they're going to be as effective in a virtual environment.
I completely agree with you on that.
yeah, it's going to be such an interesting, I think, forced experiment for a lot of those field sales teams that always hung their hat on, oh, no, you can't sell this digitally, this big, 6-figure deals, we need to go shake hands, we need to do this. And that was always kind of the argument. People left it alone. And now, it's kind of being put to the test to see, can it all be done digitally? And in my opinion, I think it can, but I guess we'll see how it plays out. Mary, do you still think, I would love to ask that question, do you think there's still, call it deal size, complexity, sales that need to have a face-to-face interaction?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you and Alyssa are helping me write my next report. It's right in progress. There's like a couple of paragraphs that just touch on these elements. Largely, I will start by saying that I feel that the on-site sales meeting was already in decline before COVID hit. We were seeing as early as 2017 that 1 in 5 buyers said they'd prefer just to meet remotely or digitally to create more efficiency or whatever it was in the process. So that was already happening, one of those smoldering trends that I think is now accelerated. The other thing that we were seeing is that the differentiation between so-called inside sales and field sales was becoming less obvious, and a more convergence of activities and roles. So I think we're going to see a world where sellers are sellers, and we're not going to define them by these virtual and analog boundaries that we've used in the past. We'll find different ways. And I think largely this period of COVID awareness until a vaccine is globally available we're going to transform the way we sell and buy, and I think we probably won't go back to anything similar to what we had in the past. So it's a long way of saying I think a lot of B2B sales will happen very effectively in a remote and digital world. I think there certainly are areas where the relationship is very key, the complexity of the solution is very key. So maybe you're talking about IT outsourcing or energy services where you actually have to go on site, or even life sciences or medical devices where those sales folks are used to meeting with surgeons, sometimes even in the operating room. So there's some situational things that would lead me to say unilaterally. I can't say that there's no on-site field meetings, but I think we are moving away from that, and we'll be moving away from that.
Yeah. Anything to add there, Alyssa?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I think we were already seeing it in our own field organization. I mean, I think part of it is, and this may be part of how we're structured. We don't have geographically defined territories as tightly as a lot of companies, and so I think people were trying to manage their calendars, and getting on a plane and traveling across the country for a meeting or two is not super efficient. So I think people were already making decisions that were the right decisions for them and for their families and for their customers. And in our case, it was not being on the road all the time. But I think it will depend. But we are seeing both in our business, but also in talking to some of our customers, that some of the biggest deals we've ever done have been happening over the last few months. So I think that as long as businesses have needs to solve and we have something that can help solve it, those big deals will continue to happen, whether it's in person or in a virtual environment. But I do think that that issue of there are going to be many more people involved in the buying decision is the bigger change. It's probably the thing we have to get used to.
Yeah, I will say, just to amplify there, that with SaaS and as a service expanding outside of just traditional tech and services, you're already seeing folks remotely closing seven-figure deals. We've been hearing about that for years, and I'm sure your teams have been doing that, Alyssa. So again, I think that trend was already in place. I'll just throw out a controversial idea, and then let's talk about the larger buying committees, because I think that's really important. What do you think, Alyssa, of the on-site sales meeting becoming a premium deliverable that the buying organization funds and pays for?
So if you want me to come out, it's going to be something that you have to foot the bill for.
There's a skew.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it starts to get into the services business. So it is that, I think that's an interesting idea.
We'll
for
see.
those companies that feel like they really need to have the face-to-face. Interesting.
I mean, because when you think about the new world, I mean, we're going to probably lose at least one airline. We're going to have not direct, limited routes in terms of direct. There will be onerous situations that you need to deal with to go onto a corporate headquarters regarding health certification and so on. And a typical sales trip that might have taken 2 days could take 5.
Right. And you also might have sellers that are not comfortable getting on a plane and traveling. I mean, again, in a post-vaccine world, that may change, but I think even when the world opens up a bit more, there may still be a pretty high hurdle for people to want to get out and visit. Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea.
It is super interesting. The only hole I see in that would be you could gain a competitive advantage pretty quick if you just started offering that for free again, and then we're back where we were. But super interesting. Okay, so I want to go and talk about the larger buying committees. Before we move on, though, something I want to touch on, going back to the skill set required for the kind of the modern seller, and we mentioned empathy, active listening, kind of all rounds up to kind of EQ, if you will. I'm going to overgeneralize, but that seems to be more of a match for female sellers who traditionally are maybe a little bit better in that arena than our typical male driving forward, dominant Hollywood seller that you see. Do you think that we're going to see more females finally in sales?
I'm going to jump in real quickly because I actually read an HBR article by Andre Soltner and a bunch of other professors from Northwestern University just a couple of days ago on that very topic. And his premise was that the new skill set was more aligned to female sellers. I mean, I don't know. I think it's always like tricky when you sort of think about those types of gender stereotypes and such. But it is a really interesting point, and I think certainly one worth exploring more. What do you think, Alyssa?
Well, I do think it's hard to make some gender stereotypes, but I think that the point that EQ is going to be at the top of the list is absolutely spot on. And I think the question is, I mean, that tends to be, I think, more of an innate attribute rather than something that's necessarily learned or taught. And yet, kind of like active listening, we're going to have to figure out how do we help everyone to develop, stronger acumen in that space. So, I think. What's that?
Super fascinating.
It is. It is.
I hope it's a trend. I think sales for a long time has needed more diversity of gender, race, thought, everything. So it would be cool if that started to play out. All right, let's go back and touch on this idea of larger buying committees. And I feel like every year since I started my sales career, a new stat comes out that it's like 3 people are in it. Now 6 people are in buying committees. I think the last one was, 8 point something. It might even be more than that now. Yeah. So it just always goes up. And I don't think it's going to slow down anytime soon. How do we prepare our sellers to just deal with more people and people that are all at different levels? It seems like it's a big job for one seller to handle all of these folks.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll take a stab at that. I've been in lots of conversations with other heads of sales who, maybe their typical sales motion is, I've got the one relationship that we need, and so we're good. We've had this relationship for 20 years, and I think that those individuals are starting to realize, again, especially in the world that we're in today, that the one economic buyer or whatever role they play is no longer sufficient. And I think what we're also seeing is a ton of turnover at every organization in all sorts of roles. So, in a prior world, I think it was 20% typically of decision maker turnover each year. That number is going to skyrocket this year for sure. So we have to be more effective at building those relationships. And whether you're doing that through LinkedIn or other social media platforms, or however you're figuring out who those people are, and then engaging, I think there's another element that's really important, which is making sure that you're nurturing those relationships. Because what's happening in these buying committees is it's not that they're all in the room with you when you're having the conversation or on the video conference. It's that they're having their own conversations, but of course influencing the decision. And when you're not aware of who has influence and who's weighing in and providing an opinion that is either supportive or not for your proposal, that's when you get into hot water. And so I think that this environment is going to force all of us to ask a lot more questions about who are all the people that have a stake in this, that have input, that have influence, and starting to follow up in building those individual relationships. And we talked about it's no longer a linear sales process. I think that there's a real risk that we lose momentum in a world where we're virtual. I don't know that it's going to be as easy to hold people to commitments and to next steps. And so making sure that we're checking in and understanding, what landmines might be we walking into in this next conversation in a way that we wouldn't have 4 months ago. Who else cares about this now? And I think, again, it's not just the CFO. We're having a lot of the proposals and conversations going up to the CEO. And I think that's happening for a lot of different types of products and services out there right now. So I think there's a lot there, but I think those are some of the things we're going to have to think about in this larger buying committee world.
Yeah, lots of great points there. I want to highlight something you said there too about the 20% decision maker turnover, which is high. And again, I feel like everything is pushing us to a world where the companies that are selling well are just going to eat the market up, and the ones that aren't doing things well, because when I think of that, if you create raving fans and really strong relationships with your buyers, and they're constantly turning over, you kind of just spread like wildfire if you're doing the right things, um, which is interesting. Mary, would love your thoughts on the larger buying committees and how they're just continue to grow and how we deal with that.
Yeah, we've been seeing that for a while in our research also. And in addition to larger distributed multi-agenda, buying decisions, we're also seeing the rise of procurement in the process as well. And that kind of goes back to one of Alyssa's earlier points around, you've got to have a very clear business case. You've got to, in some cases, build a rock solid ROI model. And so we are seeing that. We're seeing buying committees expand exponentially, but to match that, we're also seeing a more collaborative sales process and sales team. So I will say the days of the single thread buyer and the lone wolf seller are well behind us now. We're in one of the things that I think the modern seller really needs to have in terms of attributes is a desire to collaborate internally and externally. So you're seeing teams that are much wider and broader across the revenue cycle so that they can provide a higher degree of responsiveness or deeper level of expertise to these multi-tenant types of buyers that are on a nonlinear journey. So I see Alyssa nodding, and it sounds like you all have embraced that as well, or have some feedback there.
Yeah, it's funny. You hit on a bunch of the exact words that that we're trying to embrace ourselves, which is this idea of co-creation of value. And there are a couple of questions in the chat about, how do you build a rock solid case for the CFO or the CEO? And I think that one of the things that we're learning and trying to do ourselves, and I think this is going to be an expectation for everyone going forward, is we start to put everything in the customer's language. So it's no longer, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, here's what we can do for you, and here are all the bells and whistles, and here's the ROI. I think it requires sitting down in a virtual way right now and saying, here's how we typically would measure ROI and value. Let's talk about how you would measure it. Let's kick the tires on it well before it goes to procurement or CFO or anyone else, so that no one ends up looking silly and gets run out of the meeting. And not just that, but that starting to frame the challenges. It needs to be the customer's language, and when we frame the solution, it also needs to be the customer language. It's not about what's great about our product or solution. It has to be in the words that they use to talk about their priorities or strategy. Every company has its own word culture, right? They have a way of speaking that is specific to their company, and I think we have to start that's how we start to get on the same side of the table. And we do that by really workshopping it together, as opposed to us presenting a PowerPoint that's all about us.
I like that a lot. Light bulbs kind of went off in my head there, and it feels like we're going from a world where a seller used to present value, right? You would present your value, and then the hope the buyer would see it, like it, and want to get it. Now it's you're co-creating that value with your buyer. I really like that way of thinking about it. All right, so thank you everyone for the great engagement. We have a ton of people asking questions, so we're hitting some topics that are top of mind for people, and we will in about 10 minutes open it up and kind of do rapid fire Q&A. But something I wanted to talk about, which is very much in line with this kind of co-creation of value, is it's getting harder to do that because our buyers are more informed than ever, right? It's very difficult to bring new insights to the table because they can do hours of research before. They usually have their buying chart. They're ticking everything off. How, Mary, are you seeing successful teams be able to keep up with this more informed buyer and bring things new to the table?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the buyer doesn't want to be told what they already know. You need to share new ideas, new ways of thinking of things, and novel ways of approaching the conversation. So I'm seeing in my research just all kinds of really interactive tools where, imagine this, we used to go in and do a demo, and we'd be kind of fighting with a person because they'd be maybe on their smartphone or their screen. How many people have been in that circumstance? I certainly have, right? Yeah, I know. I mean, we all have. And you've flown out there, you spent all this money, you've got your best suit on, and you prepped at the bar till like 12 o'clock at night, and it's just so disheartening. So we're starting to see more interactive tools being used on the buy side, not just on the sell side, where the seller could go to the meeting either remotely or in person and either hand over an iPad or a smartphone or an app and say, you self-discover, and immediately, you're in some sort of semi-immersive, augmented reality environment that's capturing all the data, which immediately shows what the buyer is interested in, and the seller becomes elevated to more of a consultative type of role really, really quickly, and created a fun experience for the buyer. So you're not, sort of fighting for attention. You're going into their world. So I think we'll see more things like that happening that I think will be super exciting in the future.
Yeah, you're almost acting as like their tour guide almost. You know,
Sure.
you're letting them discover, and you're just there to support and maybe point out a few cool things along the way.
The biggest change, Scott, I think, is the data, which I'm sure Alyssa can weigh in on as well. Whatever the buyer's doing, you're going to extract that data as a seller or marketer. You're going to get it back, and you're going to cull it, or have someone help you cull it, or get automated insights around what's really important to the buyer. So you'll be able to go back to the buyer and tell them something that they couldn't have connected the dots on because of the rich access to data that you have.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. Alyssa, anything to add there? How do you look at equipping your team to still be able to drive insights? Are you just looking at that data again and again and again?
Oh, I mean, we are unique in that we have the LinkedIn platform that we can pull a
Right.
tremendous amount of insights from everything from, growth across different kinds of companies and regions to, I mean, there's a ton of stuff that we can pull. And so we have that unique asset, but that probably isn't the case for, everyone dialed in today. I think the other thing that I would add is if data is not necessarily at your fingertips, what I do think that you can do as a seller is be incredibly informed about what all of your competitive set is really good at and be a really good guide and advisor. It's not about winning the deal every time if you're not actually best positioned to help. And I think that's where you can really earn the respect and the trust and a referral and whatever it's not, I mean, hopefully we win more than we lose. But if you're really not best positioned after going through that whole co-creation of, what are we solving for, and can we help, that's really important. And so that is, I think, what companies can lean on if they don't have a bunch of intelligence that they can fall back on.
Mhm.
One thing I really love that you said is it's not about winning the deal every time. I mean, obviously, we all want to win the deal. But I also see a world in the future where you mentioned that there's lots of turnover and executives go to different companies and salespeople probably go to different companies too, where a salesperson's value is determined maybe not by the quota they crush, but more about their reputation in the marketplace from customers and prospects that grade the interactions with them. So I think that piece of really trying to be that advisor and not necessarily be short-sighted will be really important as well.
Yeah, I think there's a world too, in the spirit of the controversial ideas. I think there's a world where maybe it's on LinkedIn. We start to provide reviews for sellers. Wouldn't that be wouldn't that be empowering as a buyer to know the person I'm about to engage with has had great relationships and really advised and been a great guide. I think there's a lot that we could really think about as the future of.
We should do that. I know we're not either one of us responsible for LinkedIn product development, but it would be amazing. I would love that.
Yeah.
It would be, and it would reinforce all the good behavior, right?
Right.
It would hold people really, really accountable, and also it empowers the buyer and also the seller. Like if you're doing the right things and you have done your homework and you're an industry expert and people are raving about you, then when you ask for that meeting, people will take one look and be like, yeah, of course, I'm going to learn something. And I feel like that's what sales, like you go back 15 years, that's what sales was. You had incredible information that the buyer needed. They wanted to talk to you. And I feel like that would get us closer to
Back
that.
to you.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'll share one other. This is, I mean, going
Let's
back
keep
to
them coming.
get back to the basics here. But one of the other, so regardless of whether that ever comes to be, I think one of the things that we can be doing more of is asking for referrals. And it's such an old school thing, and yet I think many companies don't really. You close a great deal, you get the customer up and running, you're providing value. How often are we really going back and saying, who's someone in your network that you can introduce us to? And that is such a great option, and low to zero cost depending on how you want to roll out a program. But that's something that any company can do. And I think in this environment where trust is more important than ever, and getting in the door with someone is probably harder than ever in some ways, that's an easy old school thing that we can bring back.
Yeah. It's a great tactical tip that everyone listening on this
And
webinar
sounds
can
like
do.
Keith is doing a great job. Yeah, I think referrals, testimonials, recommendations, all of those. We can all probably do more of that.
Scott has a good comment here too. I'd also want to see a rating of buyers. I agree.
Yeah.
That would be
That would be
Very fair, right?
yeah, goes both ways. I think we see some form of this, which LinkedIn is facilitating. With just your online kind of presence and reputation. It's sort of, you're able to. I look at LinkedIn as something that can scale your reputation a little bit beyond just those who intimately know you. Okay, so before we go to questions in about 3 minutes here, I think we covered a lot of things that sellers need to be thinking about, organizations need to be doing. But if we're not going after the right target accounts, all of that is for naught. How can we make sure, or what should we be thinking about in terms of going after the right target accounts, specifically in this environment? Because maybe our old ICP is no longer relevant. Mary, what are you seeing in the broader kind of industry?
Yeah, we're seeing that organizations are definitely revisiting their target account strategy. In many cases, selling organizations have had to let go sellers, so they're dealing with, a smaller sales force. They're retrenching around existing customers and really focusing on growth. And if you might have a really phenomenal account-based marketing or account-based engagement plan in place, but if those folks are airlines, travel, rental cars, or what have you, you're going to have to really revisit and reimagine what that ICP looks like. So I think using data to find ways that companies who are still doing well in light of this challenging situation is what you want to do, because you really can't afford to have any missteps right now. Because of elongated sales cycles and all the things that we've been talking about in terms of some of the challenges from the current environment. So I think revisiting and relooking at your targeting strategy is crucial.
Alyssa, anything to add there as far as where you're shooting at right now with target accounts?
Yeah, I mean, so I just think building on what Mary just shared, so that is critical, I think, at any company right now. And one of the things that we tried to do, and that I would encourage others to think about if you haven't already, is really trying to segment. And so the way that we thought about it was there are going to be a whole bunch of companies that are in distress, and that they're going to need a certain kind of treatment, whether that's, we try to figure out how we can meet them in the middle with the challenges they're going through, or we double down on customer success and we don't have any sales conversations. That's an entirely different set of customers that have very specific needs right now. Then there are companies that are sort of frozen. And I think those companies at this point hopefully are moving a little bit out of the frozen state. But for the first few months of this environment, they were the ones that, not making any buying decisions, budgets were unclear, everything was sort of unclear. And so that was a different set of customers. And we needed to give our reps guidance on what do you do with customers that are in frozen state. And then the third is there are going to be plenty of companies right now, especially that are, benefiting or figuring out how to change their businesses and are going to come out of this doing well or pretty well. And that's a different set of behaviors and guidance that we need to give the team. So I think it's doing the analysis, then it's being very clear with your teams about how do you segment those accounts, and then what are the different plays or the different behaviors that you need to engage with in each of them.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Well put. All right, last question, and then we will hand the keys over to the community and let them drive. And I can make some assumptions on the answer here, but all these changes that we talked about, are these COVID changes, and when the world goes back to normal, we're going to go back to the old way, or is kind of the cat out of the bag? Mary, what are your thoughts here?
Well, I think it's probably clear the cat's out of the bag from my perspective and from the Forrester analyst community perspective. And the reason is because many, if not most, of these trends were already in play before COVID hit. And so I wrote a report called The State of Digitized Selling, which looked at a lot of different things that we're talking about here today. And when I wrote that report, I had no knowledge of COVID. And I thought, yeah, these trends are going to play out over 24 or 36 months. And now I think they'll play out over 6 to 12 to 18 months. So the biggest thing is I think we're seeing not a complete transformation, but an acceleration of emergent trends that probably would have taken longer in a different set of circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's right. I was going to say, I think it's an acceleration of things that I think a lot of the things that are happening, some of the investments that companies are making, the changes they're making in their go-to-market or in their company strategy are probably things that a lot of companies thought will get around to them, and all of a sudden they've been forced to accelerate. And so, yeah, I think, and I think many of the skills and the things that we've talked about are only beneficial for the buyers and the sellers. So I think it's great for our industry and our profession, and I sure hope that they stay. So I hope we only continue to do more of many of the things that have made us, effective during this time.
Absolutely. I strongly concur. I wish I had this. I should have saved this cartoon. There was this great cartoon that kind of encapsulated this. And it's all these people sitting around a boardroom, and there's a bubble that says, we've got about 5 years for digital transformation. And then there's a wrecking ball coming that's COVID-19 that kind of blows up that line of thinking.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to questions. We've got some good ones. This is from Adam Lidgerald. Adam, thank you for the question. Adam says, thanks for this webinar. I'm wondering why my colleagues and even competitors, thank goodness, feel that digital selling and social selling is still a nice to have and not a need to have. If this coronavirus pandemic shutdown and work from home does not change their minds, what can I do to continue to be more of a modern seller to catch up to the modern buyer? Alyssa, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure. Well, I think in these, when you're trying to change the hearts and minds of anyone, I think the best path typically is doing it with data and doing it with stories. And so whether it's, I don't know if you're an individual contributor or if you're a leader, but if you're able to exhibit the behaviors and the traits, and you have real life examples of successes that are coming because of the work that you've been able to do and becoming more of a modern seller, and be able to compare that. So if it's a use case of one and a great story to tell, or ideally you have a small handful of people that you can compare to everyone else, I'd be hard pressed to imagine that in this environment modern sellers are not massively outperforming people that are stuck in old ways. So you've probably got a pretty good story, but I think data is your friend in this scenario, and I think the stories though really bring it to life, because data alone, that's important, but you need to bring their hearts along as well and open up. So I guess that's my best advice, and what we try to help our customers who are oftentimes trying to have those internal debates about, is this a worthwhile exercise?
I think that's fantastic advice. And Mary, I'm sure you have advice because you deal with all sorts of industries, all sorts of companies at different stages, very, innovative SaaS companies, maybe some less innovative. How do you think of winning over the hearts and minds and being a change agent, if you will?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny because yesterday I was speaking to, Fortune 10 energy company, and, I was sharing all these great ideas, and the folks on the call were like, yeah, we agree, but, not for our industry.
Always.
I can't speak that many times, and then I could go on to another IT services company, and well, we do multi-million-dollar deals, or a logistics company. No, 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 we do everything bespoke. So no, I get it, but not us. The reality is, like you said, the cat is out of the bag. We're moving forward, and if you're a leader, like Alyssa said, the best thing you can do is to educate, enlist, inspire, share data. We've got so much great data here at Forrester. I know LinkedIn does as well with the state of sales 2020 and a bunch of other things. Start telling that story using data, enlist, educate, and inspire. And at the end of the day, I'll be maybe a little bit blunt, and it's because I was, sort of a sales manager in the past. You focus on the folks who want to make that change and want to make that journey, and the rest will sort itself out.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And one other thing I was thinking about now, it depends what access you have, but there one of the biggest challenges I often hear is, well, the people that we sell to aren't, they're not digital, they're not technology savvy. But the reality is, most professionals these days are, they're on LinkedIn and they're on other platforms, and so that might be another angle. There's the internal, the wins and the success stories. You also might be able to take the external approach, which is being able to share the data of, here's here are our buyers, and here's how they show up, whether it's on LinkedIn or other platforms that you engage with, and being able to provide that external perspective too can really help some of those people that are really holding you back.
Great advice. And yeah, there is, like, Forrester and LinkedIn are the two perfect companies to help you sort of build this business case for change